Really though, I was not planning on joining this jam. But then Artman Oil was like,
"Hello, look, hey, listen."
So I ended up joining the jam. And before the jam started, I already told Art that I had plans for one of the evenings during the jam. So already one of the evenings for the 72 hours was thrown out. So we had to make something small. And of course, that meant, for some reason, we thought WarioWare.
Peel.
Because somehow making 20 different games was going to be easier than making one small game. But the jam was about to start. So we jumped into Discord and waited for the theme to get announced.
I'm not a big fan of pistols, honestly. I don't like them that much. Oh no.
We had WarioWare in our heads and we were just hoping that the theme wasn't going to suck. And based on some of the other posts and things that we saw in the jam, we saw Strange Machines was one of the options, and that was going to work perfectly with a WarioWare style game, because each minigame could be its own strange machine. But the theme turned out to be summoning, which kind of threw us for a loop, and we almost abandoned the WarioWare idea. So we started talking about different ideas, and at this point I've worked with Artman Oil a lot for game jams and our big main game, Spend Shells. So we worked together really well. But that doesn't mean we didn't make mistakes. We had finished plotting out our game, and we came up with 8 different minigame designs, and figured that if we had more time we would just slot more in. So the idea for the game was that your summoner character was sitting in their living room playing video games that would somehow summon creatures into the room. And so as I was setting up the basic scene of how things were going to be laid out in the game, rather than going into the actual gameplay, I for some reason started with the summons. These little ball creatures that would be created as you beat the game. I gave them the physics behavior so they can bounce around, and then I let the player drag them so you can throw them around as kind of a side distraction in between different rounds of the game. But then finally I got to work on the actual gameplay of the game. I made some absolutely terrible placeholder art, for which I really could have just used squares and triangles and simple shapes, but instead I decided to draw these things for some reason. And the first minigame was Stir the Pot, which is just a cauldron and a stick, and then you mash A and D to make the stick move back and forth. And as I was looking at this horrible prototype art, Artman Oil was working on making the actual art for the game.
Pressing every single hotkey as fast as I humanly can.
Once I had the first game set up and the win condition, it was really easy to just copy and paste that chunk of code for the next game, which was Charge the Wand, which ended up being a little phallic, because in this minigame all you do is smash the spacebar to make the wand go pew. So the next game was Drag the Skull, which was just a matter of making 2 separate objects, and then giving the skull the ability to be dragged to the body. Then there was a minigame for Shaking the Bag, where you shake the bag, and one for Eat the Crystal, where you just feed objects to this horrifying mouth. An image that somehow made its way to my Discord server as an image for despair. And then of course you can't have a game like this without a minigame for sacrificing the goat, because that's just a classic. And while I think that my art is totally passable, I was really happy to check back in on art and seeing that the finished product was going to look a little better.
I have like some fancy pipes and whatnot. I didn't shade them fully because I was like, okay, they look dirtier when they're not shiny.
Then there was a minigame where you wooed Cthulhu, and you did this by shaking your hips. So I made a butt wiggling animation. Then there was Bow to the Statue, because we were kind of running out of ideas for summoning / magical type themed minigames. And this was just that classic minigame where you have a swing bar that goes back and forth, and if you stop it in the right place, then you win. And I don't know how I did it, because at 1 in the morning my brain was starting to get fried, but before I went to bed on the first night of the jam, all of the minigames were done. They weren't connected and there was no start menu or any of that stuff, but the minigame parts, the bulk of the work was done already in the first night, which is not what I'm usually used to. In most game jams I take part in, there's no game until like the last day. And right before I went to bed, Artman Oil sent me the layout for the game's kind of overlay with the character and the buttons and all that kind of stuff. But then it was getting close to 2 a.m., so I went to sleep. And when I woke up, there was a message on my phone from Discord with some new art for the minigames, because Artman Oil basically pulled an all-nighter making the art for this game, and then probably fell asleep on the ground. So after having some Saturday morning pancakes, which were smothered in maple syrup, I got to work on the game. Now of course, Artman Oil didn't know what was happening under the hood to make the minigames work, so the art that they sent me inevitably had some issues that needed to get fixed. Thankfully, Art has gotten really good at organizing their files, and it's become really easy for me to just go in and change the things I need to. Back when we first started working together, that was not the case at all, but now we're in a good place. So I got to work editing the art to make it fit properly with the game. So for the Stir the Stick minigame, all I got was a stick and the pot. So I ended up making some really quick animations, in quotations, for when the stick was pushed left or right. And in my version of Shake the Bag, nothing actually fell out of it, but Art had sent me a bunch of bits and bobs to use for that, which meant that I needed to cut them up into individual images, and then set it up so that as the bag shakes, it drops these things out randomly after so many shakes of the bag. But then my afternoon/evening plans for Saturday had to happen. So I gave Art some instructions for what was left to do with the art. And then I went out and partied all night long, because of course that's what I do on Saturdays. But then it was Sunday morning. I got up, had my coffee, looked at the beautiful sun coming out, and then quickly went back inside to the dungeon to do some more work. And at this point, the cracks were starting to show in our planning. We really didn't coordinate at all with how each minigame operated. We wrote the basic ideas down, but then didn't coordinate on the actual mechanics. So for example, the hip swinging minigame, which I thought was very clear was going to be a game about swinging your butt, instead turned into a breakdancing game with different poses and different positions, and it was just not at all what I had set up. So I had to throw that minigame out and start over. The art for it was great, and I love how it turned out, but it did require more work. What I really liked about the new art though was the new summons. Art ended up creating 10 different little ball creatures that you could play with between runs, and they were all really cute. But at this point, I needed to actually string the games together. You needed to be able to win one game and then have the next one picked to play, which meant that I now needed a way for you to lose each minigame. So Art made this health bar for the game, so if you lost the round, you'd lose one of the skulls, and each minigame had its own lose animation. That was basically always an explosion. And if you won a round, you'd get both a happy sound effect and a unique win animation for each minigame. But both me and Art had never really taken part in a Ludum Dare jam before, so we had assumed it was a 48-hour jam, so we were both scrambling to get this done today. Because most of the art was done at this point, Art had sent the game off to some friends for playtesting, and so while I was scrambling to get the game finished, Art was writing a giant list of bugs and issues that people had for me to fix. One of them was that no one knew how to play each minigame because there were no instructions. And I was frantically just going, no, 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 no. We don't have time, it's okay, it'll be fine, let's just get it done. And Art was really pushing for these instructions to be added, to the point where they just made the art and sent it to me and said, put it in. And then nearing the end of the day, we both realized only Ludum Dare compo, which is a part of Ludum Dare, is 48 hours long. And we don't qualify for that because we're 2 people on a team. So we're in the regular jam category that actually gets 72 hours to make their game. So after we both finished laughing about it, we took some time to polish up the game, beginning with the actual challenge of the game. To this point, you just played minigames in succession with no increased challenge or difficulty, which is not how these games are supposed to work. They're supposed to get faster and faster and faster, to the point where these simple minigames get really hard to win. So Artman Oil made a speed up screen that pops up after every third minigame that replaced the standard loading screen, and I just set it up so that the timescale of the game increases whenever that loading screen shows up. Which means that the animations, timers, loading screens, transitions, everything increases in speed, which by accident made the game way more intense. But that was a good thing because that's the way these games are supposed to run. So then 3 hours before the jam ended, I submitted the game, because this was my first time submitting to Ludum Dare, and I didn't want to mess things up. After submission, something kind of crazy happened. Our game, somehow, out of over 2,000 games, was the 4th most rated game in the entire jam. 2nd most rated game in the jam category, which is nuts to think about. But then, on top of that, something even crazier happened. For graphics, we were 34th in the jam, out of over 2,000 games, which means we landed in the top 2% of games in the graphics category. And then overall, we were in the top 8% of games, but top 2% for graphics. A huge thank you to my patrons. I'm kind of surprised you've stuck around this long because it's been a while since I put up a video, but I'm very grateful. So a huge thank you to my patrons. Because of them, my coffee cup is full. And as always, all of the places that I hang out are down below, and if you decide to click on one, then I'll see you there.